how Florida politicians crashed their own real estate market. For generations, they sold you a paradise. They sold you the Florida dream, a promise written in sunshine, white sand, and the alluring whisper of no state income tax. It was a promise of an easy life, an affordable retirement, a place where the value of your home would climb towards the sun endlessly and forever. It was the most successful marketing campaign in American history. And it was a lie. Because the paradise has been poisoned. The dream is turning into a waking nightmare. And the catastrophic crash of the Florida real estate market was not an act of God. It was not a hurricane. It was not an accident of economics. It was a man-made disaster. A slow-motion act of betrayal, meticulously crafted over decades in the halls of Tallahassee. This is the story of how Florida's own political class, the very people elected to be the stewards of the dream, became the architects of its ruin. Section 1. The Great Insurance Surrender. The first and most fatal betrayal was the Great Insurance Surrender. For years, politicians in Tallahassee engaged in a dangerous dance with the global insurance cartel. Instead of fortifying Florida against the inevitable storms, they chose a path of deregulation and appeasement. They passed law after law, written by insurance lobbyists, that made it easier for companies to raise rates, deny claims, and shift all the risk onto the backs of homeowners. They allowed private insurers to cherry-pick the safest, most profitable homes while dumping the riskier properties onto the state-run insurer of last resort, Citizens. They knew this was unsustainable. They knew they were creating a system that would buckle under the weight of the first major storm. And then Hurricane Ian hit, the storm they were warned about for a decade. The system didn't just buckle, it shattered. Insurers went insolvent. Others fled the state entirely, creating a vacuum of coverage. Those that remained were given permission by the politicians to raise rates by 40, 60, even 100% or more. Suddenly, the cost of insurance was no longer a line item. It became a second mortgage, a silent, invisible force that made thousands of homes instantly unaffordable, even if the mortgage was paid off. This wasn't a market failure. It was a political surrender of catastrophic proportions. They didn't just fail to protect the market, they handed the keys to the predators. Section 2. A paradise paved for developers. The next part of this tragedy was turning the state into a developer's paradise. For decades, the most powerful special interest in Florida has not been the people, but the big developers. Their campaign donations, flowing like a river into the political system, bought them the single most valuable commodity in the state, the power to build anything, anywhere. Politicians systematically dismantled environmental protections. They weakened wetland regulations. They rubber-stamped permits for massive new developments in low-lying, high-risk coastal areas and littoral swamps, the very places they knew were most vulnerable to flooding and storm surge. Every new, poorly placed development was another multi-billion-dollar bet made with the public safety and the market's stability as the wager.
This unchecked sprawl did two things. First, it fed the insurance crisis, creating billions in new, uninsurable liabilities. Second, it created a massive, artificial glut of housing supply. During the pandemic boom, they couldn't build fast enough. Now, in the bust, these sprawling new communities are becoming ghost towns, a sea of empty, identical homes with no buyers, putting massive downward pressure on the entire market. The politicians didn't see this as a risk. They saw it as a ribbon-cutting ceremony, paid for by their developer friends. Section 3. The War on Nature. The third betrayal was a quiet, insidious one, a decades-long war on nature. A healthy environment is not a luxury in Florida, it is the absolute foundation of the state's value proposition. The clean beaches, the clear water, the vibrant ecosystems, this is the product they are selling. And for decades, politicians have actively participated in its destruction. They have systematically defunded water management districts. They have sided with agricultural and industrial polluters, allowing nutrient runoff to choke the state's waterways, fueling the toxic red tide algae blooms that now plague the coasts. These blooms are not just an eyesore, they are an economic catastrophe. They kill marine life, close beaches for months, and create a nauseating stench that makes multi-million-dollar coastal properties unlivable. They ignored the reality of sea level rise, allowing critical infrastructure to be built in areas they knew would be underwater in a generation. This willful ignorance is now being priced into the market. Buyers and insurers are finally waking up to the fact that a home on a beach that is eroding or on a canal that is choked with toxic algae is not an asset, it is a liability. The politicians chose short-term political convenience over long-term environmental and economic reality, and the bill for that choice is now coming due. Section 4. The Great Affordability Deception. The final betrayal was the Great Affordability Deception. While politicians postured as champions of the working class, their policies created the most broken and inequitable housing market in the entire country. They focused all of their energy on attracting out-of-state wealth and catering to international investors, creating a market completely detached from the reality of the local Florida economy. They allowed the housing market to become a playground for speculators and Wall Street firms, who bought up thousands of starter homes, turning them into rental properties and pricing an entire generation of Floridians out of their own communities. The result was a massive, teetering house of cards, a market where the median home price in many cities requires an income 2 or 3 times what the median local job actually pays. This created a shadow demand that was entirely dependent on the flow of outside money and cheap debt. When interest rates rose and the speculative fever broke, that outside money vanished, revealing a terrifying truth. There was no local, organic demand to support the fantasy prices. The market had no foundation. The politicians hadn't built an economy, they had built a bubble, and in doing so, they had betrayed the very people, the teachers, the nurses, the firefighters, the service workers who make the state of Florida actually function. Conclusion: the unavoidable reckoning. So we stand here today in 2025 amidst the wreckage. A market where insurance is unaffordable, where a glut of new homes sits empty, where the natural beauty is under assault, and where the local population has been priced out. This was not incompetence, it was a series of choices. They chose the donations of the insurance lobby over the financial security of their constituents. They chose the profits of the developers over the long-term resilience of the state. They chose to ignore the science of a changing climate for the sake of political expediency. They chose to build a hollow, speculative economy for the wealthy instead of a stable, sustainable market for the people of Florida. The crash of the Florida real estate market is the direct, inevitable, and foreseeable consequence of these choices. It is a story of a paradise that was not lost, but sold. Sold to the highest bidder, piece by piece, until the foundation crumbled. And the people who are now left standing in the rubble are the ones who believed in the dream, while the architects of its ruin have long since cashed the checks.
This was not incompetence. It was a series of deliberate choices, a long and tragic history of priorities that placed short-term profit above long-term stability. They chose the campaign donations of the insurance lobby over the financial security of their constituents. They chose the profits of the developers over the ecological and economic resilience of the state. They chose to ignore the undeniable science of a changing climate for the sake of political expediency. They chose to build a hollow, speculative economy for the wealthy and the transient, instead of a stable, sustainable market for the people of Florida. The crash of the Florida real estate market is the direct, inevitable, and foreseeable consequence of these choices. It is a story of a paradise that was not lost, but sold to the highest bidder, piece by piece, until the very foundation crumbled. And what comes next? This is not a simple V-shaped recovery. This is a fundamental repricing of risk that has been ignored for too long. The market will now be fractured into two distinct Floridas. There will be the insulated, ultra-wealthy enclaves, the cash-only islands where the rules of the normal world do not apply. And then there will be everywhere else. For the average homeowner, the dream of endlessly appreciating home equity has been replaced by a brutal new reality. They are now trapped in a vicious cycle. The crashing home values are wiping out their net worth, while the skyrocketing cost of ownership, driven by insurance, property taxes, and HOA fees, is draining their monthly income. They are simultaneously poorer on paper and poorer in their daily lives. This is the political legacy they have left behind, a market where the fundamental promise has been broken, a place where owning a piece of the Sunshine State no longer feels like a dream, but like a liability. The exodus you are about to witness will not be the wealthy flying in on private jets, but the middle class fleeing in U-Hauls, seeking refuge in states where the cost of living hasn't been weaponized against them. The final, bitter irony is that the very politicians who orchestrated this disaster will now position themselves as the saviors. They will propose task forces, committees, and superficial reforms, all while the special interests that created the problem continue to write the laws. But the damage is done. The trust has been broken. The Florida dream, as it was once known, is over. And the people who are now left standing in the rubble are the ones who believed in that dream, while the architects of its ruin have long since cashed the checks.